Ray Patel's boots clicked in perfect rhythm across the black mat before the tomb, each strike precise as a metronome set by oath rather than mechanics. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat, while first light slid through Arlington mist and laid a pale silver sheen across marble, rifles, and rows of white headstones rising over the hill like a silent formation that never broke. The morning carried that thin autumn chill that woke the skin before the mind. Dew clung to clipped grass. The polished stone of the plaza held yesterday's cool and returned it through the soles of every shoe that crossed it. Beyond the amphitheater, the nation's capital was already stirring with traffic and timetables. But inside that ring of marble and memory, time moved by older commands. A bell tone drifted from farther grounds. Flags shifted once in a light wind and then held. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves, pressed wool, and the clean bite of brass polish. Ray did not blink more than he had to. He did not rush and never dragged a step. At 6'2", broad through shoulders and chest, he looked less like a man-standing post and more like a wall that had learned to march upright with deliberate grace. His uniform was immaculate, every line tuned to regulation and reverence both. Every crease looked sharp enough to cut glass. His boots were polished to a mirror shine that caught the newborn light. White gloves remained pristine despite the damp morning. The rifle in his right hand sat steady, an extension of discipline rather than a burden of weight. His kepi hat was perfectly angled, his face an unreadable mask of discipline. His eyes locked on a point only he could see until the next turn returned him to the same sacred geometry. The crowd gathered in layers as it always did. Those who came to witness and those who came because they had to stand where sacrifice still had a visible form. A pair of Marines on leave stood near the rope line with hands behind their backs, shoulders unconsciously matching Ray's posture, as if muscle memory had answered an order no one spoke. An elderly woman in a navy coat held a folded program against her chest. A bronze pin shaped like crossed rifles rested at her collar, polished by years of touch. 2 middle school classes stood in clusters, teachers whispering reminders to keep phones down. A father in work boots lifted his son just enough for him to see over the shoulders in front without blocking anyone else. 3 veterans in old unit caps, weathered faces lined by sun and winters and quiet losses, watched with stillness that came from recognition, not spectacle. No one around Ray truly mistook this for performance. Even the tourists who had arrived expecting a photo stop felt the weight settle when they crossed into that space. The difference announced itself without a speech. It lived in cadence, in stone, in the silence that followed each turn. A teenage boy who had started to raise his phone lowered it, tucked it into his pocket, and stood straighter. His younger sister followed him without being asked. Near the back, a man in a silver star cap shifted his cane from one hand to the other and pressed his jaw tight as Ray approached the south end of the mat, paused, turned, and began his return. To the crowd, he appeared carved from composure. Inside, Ray's awareness moved at a different velocity. He tracked the edge of every movement in his peripheral vision. A stroller wheel near the barrier, a gust that tried to lift the corner of a visitor pamphlet, a child stepping half a shoe length past a marked line before her mother's hand returned her gently. He registered the cadence of breaths around him, the scrape of rubber sole on marble, the tiny metallic click of a camera strap buckle hitting a zipper pull. None of it pulled him from mission. All of it lived inside mission. Discipline here was not blankness. It was total presence, filtered through ritual until no motion was wasted. He passed the center line again, and the unknowns beneath the tomb seemed to rise in the mind of everyone watching. That was the paradox of the place. Anonymity that felt more personal than many names. People who had never met any soldier stood under that sky and felt suddenly accountable to men they would never know. A middle-aged woman in a hospital badge, still wearing scrubs under a cardigan, pressed a knuckle beneath one eye and exhaled through parted lips. Beside her, an older man in a bomber jacket whispered, almost too low to hear, "This is what duty looks like." She nodded once and did not answer. Ray's jaw remained relaxed. His chin stayed level. The measured pivot at the end of his lane was a clean axis turn. No extra movement in knee or hip, no drift in the rifle's line. He did not perform a motion because the duty was not about him, yet the life he had lived before that plaza was present, in the way steel is present, in a blade you cannot see. Afghanistan had taught him that chaos arrived as fragments first, a vibration through the ground, a silence that lasted half a breath too long, a shadow where it should not be. Syria had taught him that hesitation could be costly in ways language failed to hold. The shrapnel seam under his left rib sometimes ached when weather turned. But this morning it stayed quiet, as if even old wounds recognized sacred ground and stood down. At the edge of the crowd, a boy of about 10 tugged his grandmother's sleeve and whispered, "Why does he count the same every time?" She bent close enough that only he heard. "Because some promises are kept the same way every day," she said. The boy looked back toward Ray, considered the answer, and folded his hands in front of him, as if he had entered a chapel. A few feet away, a wheelchair rolled into place beside the rope. Its occupant, an older veteran, with a Purple Heart patch sewn onto his vest, lifted 2 fingers in an almost salute and held them there until Ray's pass was complete. Mist thickened briefly, then thinned as the sun climbed. Light struck the marble inscription, making each letter look deeper, almost carved in shadow. The amphitheater columns stood pale and unyielding, their lines echoing the straightness of Ray's posture. Somewhere above, a crow crossed the open sky and disappeared beyond the trees. The wider world remained restless and loud and transactional. Here, boots on stone translated memory into action. Here, a vow to guard their memory had physical form, measured in steps and seconds. Ray completed another 21, paused, and turned. His breathing stayed controlled, low in the diaphragm, unchanged by temperature or observation. He felt the weight of the rifle and the pressure of glove against stock in exact familiarity. He felt the cloth at his shoulder's seam hold against movement. He felt the quiet scrutiny of strangers and the steadier gaze of veterans who measured him by standards older than either of them. None of it altered cadence. This was the point. The fallen had paid in full. The living answered by remaining precise. A camera crew from a local station waited at the perimeter, with gear cased and lowered, respecting protocol. Their producer, a woman with a clipboard under one arm, whispered to her audio tech, "No close push-in while he turns." The tech nodded immediately. Even in media rhythms built on urgency, the tomb set terms. A park guide in gray uniform stood near the steps and gave a brief, soft explanation to new arrivals, voice pitched so it reached ears without breaking atmosphere. When she said, "They guard 24 hours a day in all weather," several people glanced at Ray and then at the sky as if checking whether dawn chill qualified as hardship. The veterans did not glance. They already knew weather was never the test. Constancy was. On his next pass, Ray came level with a small cluster of high school athletes in matching jackets. One of them, broad-shouldered and loud by habit, started to shift his weight and speak, then caught sight of the old man in the silver star cap standing rigid beside him. The teenager closed his mouth, straightened his jacket hem, and faced forward. The correction required no reprimand. Reverence moved through crowds the way wind moved through flags, invisible but unmistakable. In that hour, before commuter noise rose from the river, and before airport departures accelerated into their morning surge, the tomb held a still center. Ray was its moving line, the living proof that memory was not passive. The discipline in his stride, the exacting turn, the controlled stillness at each pause, all of it testified to a principle older than any one uniform. Honor demanded repetition because forgetting happened by degrees. A place where history was not just remembered, but lived, required sentinels who understood that routine could be a form of devotion. He marched another cycle, then another, rhythm unbroken. A little girl in a bright yellow coat, seated between her parents on a low stone bench, placed her hand over her heart after watching him for several minutes and left it there because no one told her to, because children often recognized sacred posture faster than adults who had spent years negotiating with cynicism. Her father noticed and mirrored her gesture. Her mother followed. Behind them, a veteran with a cane shifted to stand at attention as long as his knees would allow. Ray reached the end of the mat, paused into silence, and turned with flawless control. Morning had fully arrived now, but the plaza still felt set apart from ordinary time, suspended between loss and gratitude, discipline and mercy, stone and breath. He continued his measured route under a brightening sky, his boots clicking in perfect rhythm, 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat, while America watched and remembered. He finished that turn, drove his heel down in the next measured step, and the plaza held its breath with him until the relief commander's command cut through the morning in a crisp line of authority. Ray completed the cycle exactly, surrendered the mat with ceremonial precision, and marched off without breaking the geometry of the ritual. Only when he cleared the immediate perimeter did he let his shoulders settle by a fraction. The mist was lifting now. Sunlight had sharpened the white headstones into bright rose, and visitors began to exhale, speak, and move again in subdued voices. He stripped down in the ready room with the same economy he brought to post. Gloves folded, jacket hung, brass checked and covered, kepi set in its case. A plain, dark jacket went over a charcoal shirt. Duty replaced by civilian anonymity that still could not conceal his bearing. The shrapnel seam under his left rib tugged once as he reached for his bag, a thin reminder that the body kept archives no metal could summarize. At 8:12 that morning, he signed out, nodded to a fellow sentinel headed in, and stepped into a world that measured value by speed. Traffic toward Reagan National moved in impatient bursts. Jet noise rolled low over the river. By the time Ray reached departures, the air had turned humid with exhaust and jet fuel, that metallic, bitter mix unique to airports where reunions and goodbyes happened on the same curb. Porters steered luggage carts between idling cars. Airline staff in Navy vests worked the lane with practiced urgency. A businessman argued over a delayed bag while glancing at two phones. A family in matching travel shirts huddled around a stroller and a stack of carry-ons. The sacred silence of Arlington had given way to horns, rolling suitcases, and overlapping announcements from terminal speakers. Ray stood near a painted pedestrian crossing just beyond door 4, waiting on a ride share that was 3 minutes out. He scanned without appearing to scan. To everyone else, he was just a tall man in a plain jacket, close-cropped hair, calm expression, hands free, posture straight. What they could not see was the old habit underneath. Angles, exits, vehicle speeds, sight lines through glass, bottlenecks near bollards, who was distracted, who was decisive, who was afraid. Training did not switch off. it nested. An elderly man in a Marine Corps cap eased a wheelchair down the curb, cut with patient care, speaking softly to the girl beside him. Gunnery Sergeant Samuel Ortiz had the weathered steadiness of someone who had lived through noise and learned not to waste words. His granddaughter Elena, small and watchful in a denim jacket with embroidered daisies, kept one hand on the wheelchair handle and the other around a thin chain of dog tags resting against her palm. 2 steps behind them, a woman in hospital scrubs rolled a carry-on and checked the crossing light. Cars slowed. A taxi halted. The lane opened for 6 seconds of ordinary mercy. Then the black SUV came in hot from the outer lane, engine growling, grill nosing through the striped crossing without yielding, horn blasting once, as if right-of-way could be purchased by volume. "Hey!" someone shouted. Ortiz yanked the chair backward with both hands. The bumper clipped the handle hard enough to wrench it sideways and spin the chair half a turn, metal screeching against curb paint. Elena stumbled but stayed upright, dragged back by Ortiz's forearm as he twisted to shield her. A suitcase toppled. A mother screamed. A line of passengers froze in place, mouths open, phones hanging useless at their sides as the moment split into shock and motion. The driver's window dropped halfway. Platinum cufflinks flashed on the steering wheel. Victor Hale leaned toward the opening with a contemptuous curl at the edge of his mouth and barked, "Move, parade people," as if the injured and the old were debris in his departure plan. Then he surged forward, clipped past a baggage cart by inches, and shot toward the terminal exit ramp. The crowd froze. Not in metaphor, in body. A teenager in a varsity jacket stood with one shoe off the curb and did not set it down. A ramp agent with orange hearing protection halfway around his neck stared after the SUV with both hands still on a cart handle. 2 Marines on leave snapped their attention from Ortiz to the fleeing vehicle and back, waiting for a signal that had not yet been spoken. The nurse in scrubs dropped to one knee beside Ortiz, voice suddenly all business, fingers checking him while Elena stood trembling and silent, dog tags clenched white-knuckled against her chest. Ray was already moving. He reached Ortiz in 3 strides, dropped to a controlled crouch, and caught the older man's shoulder before he could pitch forward. "Stay with me, Gunny," he said, voice clipped, level, leaving no room for panic. He looked once at the departing SUV and locked what mattered, black Escalade, Virginia plate K8V4172, right rear mirror cracked and hanging, fresh silver transfer on the bumper, departure lane to outer ramp, probable split toward private garage or southbound exit, depending on current congestion. His thumb hit emergency dispatch before his second breath. "Hit and run at DCA departures. Door 4 crosswalk," he said. 1 elderly male injured, child standing, no visible major trauma. Suspect vehicle black Escalade, Virginia K8 V4172. Right mirror damaged, heading east ramp now. Request airport police, intercept at garage and charter access points. Dispatch started to ask him to repeat. He did not. "Read back," he said. They read it back. Correctly. He handed the phone to the kneeling nurse without looking away from Ortiz. "Stay online. Tell them if his breathing changes." Then he turned to Elena, softened his tone by a single degree. "You did good. Step behind that bollard with the Marines. Keep those tags in your hand." She nodded and obeyed because command delivered with calm can feel like shelter. Sirens began in the distance, faint at first, then building. A baggage handler pointed shakily toward the ramp. "He almost hit the shuttle, too." Ray caught the man's eyes. "You saw the lane?" "Outer. Didn't break. Stay here for police statement." A woman in a business suit stared at him, stunned. "Are you law enforcement?" "No," he said, pressing folded cloth against Ortiz's forearm, where skin had split on the curb edge. Just paying attention. What none of them knew in that thundering minute, not the frozen crowd, not the driver accelerating toward polished privacy, was that the broad-shouldered man in a plain jacket had spent years learning how to read chaos before it finished unfolding, how to pin memory to detail under stress, and how to pursue without rage when rage would only blur the target. 10 minutes earlier, none of that curbside crowd had marked Ray as anything more than another traveler between obligations. That misread was the hidden variable that would define the next 6 minutes. He had not announced his service. He did not wear insignia off-duty, but years in Afghanistan and Syria had conditioned his senses into a disciplined framework that made ordinary environments map themselves in layers: route, cover, choke point, threat vector, witness reliability, response window. In Kunar, he had learned to memorize plates because vehicles turned into evidence, and evidence turned into justice only if someone could testify with precision when noise swallowed context. In Raqqa's outskirts, he had learned that people lie fast under pressure, but metal, timing, and angle do not. By mid-October, the airport had already shifted into heavy travel tempo, and that morning's departures lane was a moving puzzle of impatience and routine. Ray had solved the puzzle without appearing to study it. He had noted the private aviation access road beyond the main garage because high-net-worth travelers favored speed over lines. He had clocked airport police visibility gaps near door 4, where delivery vans briefly blocked camera arcs. He had registered that the outer ramp was clear enough for a hard acceleration at exactly the wrong second. This was not paranoia. It was professional decomposition of risk, the same mindset that let a sentinel stand calm while internally tracking everything. He pressed down on Ortiz's wound and monitored respiration, shallow but regular, pulse elevated, orientation intact. "Name," Ray said. "Samuel Ortiz," the older man answered through clenched teeth. "Where are you hurt?" "Arm. Hip took curb." "Any chest pain?" "No." "Good. Stay with me." The nurse relayed vitals to dispatch, then looked up. "Ambulance 2 minutes out." Ray nodded once and scanned for witnesses he could trust to hold shape under questioning. The teenager with the lowered phone was still there, pale now, eyes fixed on the ramp. The baggage handler had not moved. A woman in an airline blazer had already opened an incident form on a tablet, fingers trembling but efficient. 2 Marines had formed a human pocket around Elena, creating space between her and the crowd without making a scene. One of them crouched to Elena's eye level and said, "You're safe, kiddo." She kept her chin up and gripped the dog tags harder. Ray's mind ran the clock. 90 seconds to terminal exit if Hale hit green lights. 3 minutes to private garage if he diverted for a clean vehicle swap. 6 minutes to charter ramp if he trusted status to clear him through. The prevailing assumption among men like Hale was that authority could be rented in advance and consequences negotiated afterward. Ray had seen that paradigm before in different uniforms and languages. Evidence suggested otherwise when disciplined witnesses moved faster than money. Airport police crackled over nearby radios. A cart driver in a reflective vest pulled up and leaned out, breathless. Officer said someone called in plate and mirror damage. "That you?" Ray gave a short nod. "I can cut service corridor to East Gate. Faster than a road lockup." A primary consideration flickered through Ray's mind. Stay with injured or extend the live track. He solved it in one motion. He handed the driver his spare phone, already open to dispatch relay. "You drive, I update. We stop at any police unit en route." Then to the nurse. "Paramedics get here. Tell them Ortiz was ambulatory before impact, no head strike witnessed, mechanism was chair handle strike and curb fall. She repeated it back word for word. At 8:26 that morning, the first ambulance turned into departures with lights strobing across terminal glass. Reflections pulsed over faces in the crowd, over aluminum rails, over rain-specked windows of idling cars. Ray leaned close to Ortiz. "I'm going after him." Ortiz's eyes, old and iron-steady, locked on his. "Do it right." Ray answered with the smallest nod. "Always." He rose, stepped to Elena, and dropped briefly to one knee so she did not have to look up at command. "Your granddad's in good hands. Stay with these Marines. Keep breathing slow." "Are you coming back?" she asked. "Yes." He stood, turned and moved for the service lane with controlled speed. No wasted movement, no dramatics. Behind him, witnesses began speaking in fragments as shock thawed into testimony. "Black SUV. Didn't even stop. He yelled at them. Plate ends 7-2. The crowd that had frozen was becoming a record. What Hale did not know as he pushed toward private access was that his flight had already narrowed into coordinates and timestamps. What he could not see in his mirror, cracked and swinging on its housing, was a man in a plain jacket climbing onto an airport cart with the composure of ceremony and the instincts of combat, already following with disciplined precision. The cart jolted as its electric motor caught, then surged into the service lane that ran behind departures, a narrow corridor of concrete, painted arrows and fluorescent glare where airports showed their bones instead of their glass and gloss. Ray planted one boot against the cart rail, one hand on the upright bar, and kept his shoulders square while the driver cut left past a pallet jack and a stack of shrink-wrapped catering bins. Overhead, a jet clawed into the low cloud deck, and the vibration rolled through the tunnel walls like distant artillery muffled by modern drywall and steel. Humid air carried fuel, hot brake dust, coffee concentrate, and rain just beginning to tap at loading bay doors in a quick, uneven rhythm. A baggage tug screamed by in the opposite lane, towing silver carts stamped with airline logos and rainwater streaks. Two mechanics in hearing protection flattened themselves against the cinder block wall to let Ray's cart pass, one of them staring at the phone in Ray's hand, where dispatch text updates pulsed in green and white. The driver, a compact man with a name patch reading G. Luna, kept his eyes forward and his jaw set. Eastgate in 90 if we don't get blocked," he said. "Take the maintenance split after Bay C," Ray answered. "Camera coverage is thinner there. He may choose it." Luna flicked him a quick glance, assessing without asking for credentials. "You military?" Ray watched a forklift reverse on their right, judged the gap, and said, "Yes." That one word settled the exchange. Luna drove harder. At 8:27 that morning, rain crossed from suggestion to weather. Thin needles streaked down the ramp entrances, turning oil sheens into black mirrors and throwing blurred neon across pooled water. Sirens that had started as distant threads were now layered and directional, some closing on departures, others spreading toward outer checkpoints as airport police widened the net Ray had fed them. His relay phone vibrated. Dispatch text: Unit 14, moving to private garage south. Unit 22, holding charter access. EMS on scene door 4. Ray keyed the mic and spoke with the same cadence he used for commands on sacred stone. Advise EMS witness reports include verbal statement from driver, move parade people. Preserve curbside audio pulls from door 4 camera cluster. Copy came back at once. The service corridor opened briefly into a glass-sided connector where the public world flashed by in slices, a couple arguing over boarding groups, a priest in black carrying only a canvas satchel, a boy in a soccer hoodie asleep against a rolling suitcase, two flight attendants walking in lockstep with overnight fatigue hidden beneath practiced composure. Nobody in that passing river knew that 10 meters away, behind tinted utility glass, a former combat infantryman was tracking a felony by map geometry and memory discipline, breathing as steadily as if he were still pacing 21 steps beneath a flag. That discipline had not stayed in Arlington when he signed out. It traveled with him in posture and precision, in the way his eyes took inventory before his voice took space. Even in a dark civilian jacket, Ray carried the old guard silhouette, back straight, chin level, movement efficient, no fidgeting, no wasted glance. Men who had served recognized it in seconds. Civilians felt it without naming it. It was the same bearing that had held still before the tomb, while mist lifted from marble, and a nation filed past in silence. The memory of that plaza moved through him now, not as nostalgia, but as calibration. He could still feel the clean weight of the ceremonial rifle in his right hand, the exact drag of wool at the shoulder seam, the cool grip of white gloves, the kepi brim cutting the brightening dawn into a narrow field of intent. Every crease had been sharp enough to cut glass. Boots had held a mirror shine despite dew. Brass had thrown first light like small contained suns. The uniform was not decoration. It was structure. It taught the body to obey principle before impulse, and in a service lane behind baggage bays, that structure kept panic from entering the bloodstream. Luna cut through the maintenance split, tires hissing on wet concrete. They passed a bank of gray doors marked electrical, fire suppression, catering cold storage. A woman in a wheelchair waited near one doorway, with an airline assistance agent holding an umbrella over both of them. An elderly veteran in a faded desert camouflage cap sat on a bench under the overhang, one hand around a cane, the other pressing a folded boarding pass flat against his thigh to keep it dry. A teenage airport volunteer in a bright vest lowered his phone as the cart shot by, face tightening when he recognized emergency velocity and chose attention over spectacle. The details stacked themselves in Ray's mind because details became testimony later. Rain intensity, lane obstructions, which cameras faced outward and which had dead angles, which witnesses looked away and which held steady. At Arlington, crowds gathered in reverence, veterans with weathered faces, children tugging sleeves, school groups learning silence, elderly couples with service pins at the collar. Here at Reagan, the crowd was a different catalog of the same country. Gate agents with clipped authority, exhausted parents balancing carry-ons and trust, nurses flying on too little sleep, Marines on leave still standing straight when a child cried nearby, old men who had carried rifles before smartphones existed. Different uniforms, same moral terrain. Someone had been struck in front of all of them. Someone had tried to leave consequence behind in exhaust. Luna braked hard at a security arm. A private ramp guard stepped out in a rain shell, hand raised. "Lane's locked. Police directive." Ray was off the cart before the wheels stopped. He held both hands visible, voice controlled. "Witness tracker. Active relay with airport dispatch. Suspect Escalade plate K8V4172 headed toward charter access. You have visual?" The guard hesitated, eyes flicking between Ray's plain jacket and the urgency in his stillness. Then he touched his earpiece, listened, and pointed through the rain. "Black SUV entered 2 minutes ago. Stopped near Jet Stair C. Security trying to stall without escalation." Ray nodded once. "Keep this arm down. No outbound until police establish box." "Already ordered." Ray stepped back onto the cart. Go. As they pushed through the gate, he felt the old wound under his left rib tighten with the cold damp, a thin seam of scar tissue speaking in the language of weather and memory. He ignored it the way he had ignored it for years, not from bravado, but from hierarchy. Pain was data. Duty was directive. The private ramp spread wide and exposed under gray morning, floodlights buzzing against rain haze, corporate jets lined in disciplined rows with tails painted in clean private colors. Ground crews in reflective jackets moved briskly around refueling trucks and stairs, their headsets crackling as they glanced toward the idling Escalade near Jet Stair C. The SUV sat angled for a fast exit, wipers slashing, dark paint beaded with rain, right mirror hanging cracked exactly as Ray had called it. Security contractors hovered 5 yards back, hands near radios, uncertain whether to confront wealth or wait for authority. The crowd began to reform there too, drawn by tension, the way iron filings gathered around a magnet. A family with 2 children in noise-canceling headphones paused under an awning and stared. A pilot in a Navy overcoat stopped mid-stride, flight bag in hand, and did not move again. 2 wheelchair passengers sheltered beside a baggage cart, attendants flanking them like quiet shields. One of the Marines from Departures had made it this far with Elena and stood near a light pole, body turned to block wind from her while she held her father's dog tags in a closed fist. Ray caught that in one glance and filed it, as both reassurance and responsibility. He did not advance yet. He stayed by the cart, rain stippling his jacket, and ran the scene through the framework he had earned the hard way. Terrain, actors, exits, weapons likelihood, authority distance, civilian proximity. The Escalade's driver door remained shut. Engine vibration was visible in the hood tremor. Jet stairs to the right created a funnel. Fuel truck left rear created hazard. Security team uncoordinated but compliant. Police response imminent if dispatch estimates held. That framework had been built years before this rain, before private ramps and billionaires and airport cameras, in mountain valleys where roads were narrow and choices narrower. Ray had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Syria with an infantry unit that learned to read intent from tiny cues because waiting for certainty got men killed. In Kunar province, his platoon had run route security through villages where children waved from rooftops, while men with hidden radios tracked convoy timing. In Helmand, heat rose off dirt roads so hard it bent distance, and every culvert looked like a question with teeth. In northern Syria, he moved through fractured blocks where concrete dust coated the tongue, and every doorway carried both danger and civilians seeking help. He learned to separate noise from signal, ego from threat, fear from action. He was 23 in Kunar when he first met specialist Marcus Donnelly, called Mac by everyone who had served beside him longer than an hour. Mac was broad-faced, quick with a grin, and chronically overconfident in his own cooking, despite evidence stacked against him by entire squads. In a plywood mess area lit by humming bulbs, Mac once dropped a tray of scorched potatoes, saluted the wreckage with comic solemnity, and said, "If I burn dinner again, tell my mom I fought bravely against potatoes." Men who had slept 2 hours in 3 days laughed anyway, because humor in war was less entertainment than oxygen. Mac could also read a room full of frightened civilians, faster than most intelligence briefs could. He carried candy in his cargo pocket for kids and spare batteries for the platoon radio because, he said, no one wins when comms die. On patrol, he walked with alert ease, scanning windows, road edges, rooftops, never dramatic, never careless. He was the first to volunteer for the dull jobs that kept others alive. route checks at dawn, late-night guard rotations, rechecking perimeter wire when everyone else wanted sleep. He spoke little about fear and often about duty, and when he did talk about home, it was always his mother first, then his younger sister, then the river behind their house where he swore fish were smart enough to dodge him out of spite. In the summer of Ray's second Afghanistan tour, outside a market road in Kunar, a white sedan rolled too slowly toward a group of civilians pinned near a checkpoint barrier. The warning signs came in fragments. Driver not making eye contact, rear suspension sagging, one rear tire riding low despite full load, two men on a corner turning away at the same instant. Ray saw it and moved. So did Mac. There was not enough time for elegant choices. Mac drove three civilians behind a concrete lip and turned back as the blast hit, a brutal pressure wave that swallowed light, sound, and distance in one violent compression. When the dust settled, civilians lived. Mac did not. The official report wrote it in precise military language. Hostile, vehicle-borne, improvised explosive device, casualties sustained, civilian lives preserved by immediate action. Language did its best. It still came up short. What stayed with Ray was not the report. It was Mac's voice 2 nights earlier, teasing a medic over instant coffee and saying, "If we're gonna be ghosts one day, let's at least leave people safer than we found them." Ray carried that sentence into every post and every morning thereafter. His Bronze Star with Valor had come a year later for actions in Syria during an extraction under indirect fire, when he held a corridor long enough for a medic team and 2 wounded partner force fighters to reach an armored vehicle. He wore the ribbon when required, accepted the handshake, and put the citation away. Decorations mattered, but they did not quiet the mortar echoes that sometimes woke him before dawn, with his heart already racing. They did not erase the scar beneath his left rib, where shrapnel found him in a narrow street outside Raqqa. They did not close the ledger names wrote in him. When his active combat cycle ended, he had choices: training cadre, contract work, quiet civilian life where people thanked service in airports and moved on. He chose the old guard because he needed duty that did not pretend loss had passed. At the tomb, the mission was explicit and unending. Honor the unknown, guard memory, stand where names were absent and sacrifice was still absolute. The ritual gave grief a structure it could survive inside. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat. Precision as prayer, constancy as oath. Rain thickened, drumming on the cart roof and the jet fuselage beyond. Ray's phone buzzed again. Police, 30 seconds out. Lieutenant Colonel Whittaker, en route. He drew one slow breath and let it out through his nose, eyes on the cracked mirror of the idling Escalade. In the reflection of that broken glass, he could see the blurred shapes of waiting civilians, security staff, and service members who had converged without choreography into a witness line. Behind him, Elena stood under the Marine's sheltering arm, small hand still wrapped around dog tags, as if metal could anchor the world. Ray stepped off the cart into the rain, shoulders squared, bearing unchanged, and advanced across the wet tarmac with the same disciplined calm he brought to marble at dawn. Rain tracked down Ray's jacket in narrow lines and darkened the shoulders first, but his pace never altered. He crossed the slick tarmac as if he were still on measured stone, heel set, centerline steady, eyes fixed on the idling Escalade and the man behind its tinted glass. Security contractors shifted uneasily to give him room, radios near their mouths, their uncertainty visible in small movements of hands and feet. They had stalled a powerful traveler for less than 2 minutes, and already they were feeling the institutional gravity that money tried to impose. Victor Hale sat behind the wheel with one hand at 12 o'clock and the other gripping a satellite phone, jaw tight with irritation rather than fear. He was 50, broad through the torso from boardrooms instead of barracks, expensive haircut untouched by weather, platinum cufflinks flashing each time the wipers swept rain from his line of sight. His suit was charcoal, tailored to telegraph authority in every seam. The watch on his wrist could have funded a veteran family's mortgage for a year. Everything about him announced a lifetime of moving through doors that opened before he reached them. His rise had become a modern legend in business magazines. Founder of Aegis Vector Systems, architect of autonomous defense contracts, keynote speaker at security summits where applause followed every line about innovation and strategic deterrence. Networks called him visionary. Investors called him inevitable. Staff called him Sir in voices calibrated to survive his temper. The prevailing pattern underneath the polished interviews was older and simpler. Rules were for slower people. Consequences were for smaller people. If an obstacle appeared, he pushed through and let legal teams clean the road behind him. At Reagan that morning, he had already snapped at check-in staff for delaying his luggage transfer and dismissed a gate supervisor with a flick of 2 fingers when she asked him to move his vehicle to the marked zone. He treated the airport the way he treated every shared space, as a corridor to be cleared rather than a system serving other human beings. When he had surged through the crosswalk and struck Samuel Ortiz's wheelchair handle, he had not seen a retired Marine and a child. He had seen friction. Now he watched Ray approach and made the same calculation again. He lowered his window 2 inches and barked at a private ramp guard without taking his eyes off Ray. "Who is that?" "Another parade boy you dragged over to posture." "Move him." "I have wheels up in 6. The guard did not answer. His radio crackled with airport police traffic, and he stepped back instead. Hale's mouth curled. Unbelievable. He tapped his headset. "Paige, are you hearing this? They're detaining me on a wet runway because someone tripped near a curb. Call Operations Command and remind them who signed the Raven contract." The woman on the other end spoke too quietly for anyone else to catch, but Hale cut her off anyway. "No, I'm not waiting. Patch legal. Now." 10 yards away, Ray stopped. He planted his boots shoulder-width apart and let stillness do what shouting never could. To the crowd, he looked carved from patience, a silent figure in a plain jacket staring down an idling SUV that outweighed him by 2 tons. Inside, every system was running at combat tempo. He tracked Hale's right shoulder angle for signs of sudden door movement, clocked the position of the fuel truck near the jet stair, measured crosswind against spray coming off the Escalade's tires, noted where Elena stood under the Marine's cover, and kept one ear on dispatch through the relay phone clipped to his belt. A pilot under the awning whispered to a flight attendant. "Who is he?" She watched Ray's posture and answered, "Not airport staff." Near the light pole, Elena leaned out from the Marine's rain jacket long enough to see Ray standing in the lane. Dog tags pressed into her palm left small marks on her skin, but her chin stayed lifted. The Marine beside her, Corporal Drew Hanley, recognized the bearing first. Not the face, the bearing. He had seen it at Arlington as a recruit, the same controlled stillness that made noise around it sound small. Hanley tightened his stance and murmured, "He's got this." At 8:29, lightning flashed far beyond the river, too distant for thunder, but bright enough to silver the jet tails for an instant. Hale opened his door halfway and stepped out into rain he clearly resented touching him. He did not close the door. He stood with the practiced arrogance of a man who believed any confrontation could be turned into a negotiation, then into a transaction, then into a victory. Water darkened his suit at the shoulders. He ignored it. "You," he said to Ray, jabbing a finger. "Step aside. You don't get to hold me here because you're having feelings about traffic." Ray did not move. Hale took 2 steps forward, stopping short of the SUV's headlight beam. "I said, step aside, toy soldier." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crews and passengers. A ground mechanic shook his head slowly. One of the wheelchair attendants put a hand over her mouth. A gray-haired traveler near the service door eased out beneath the overhang and stared at Hale, with an expression carved from old anger and older restraint. What Hale could not see, because arrogance narrows perception, was the network already tightening around him. Dispatch had locked the timestamp from door 4. CCTV pulls were in progress. 2 witnesses had provided recorded statements. EMS had documented Ortiz's injuries and mechanism exactly as Ray relayed. Airport police units were converging from 3 directions to prevent a breakout toward either main exit or South Perimeter Road. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Whitaker was 2 minutes out with military liaison authority. Hale believed he was in an argument. He was inside a case file. Hale looked Ray up and down, dismissive. Plain jacket, no badge visible, no sidearm, no rank insignia on display. In Hale's framework, that meant negligible. "Listen carefully," Hale said. "I fund systems that protect people like you. I don't answer to ramp security and cosplay discipline. Name your supervisor." Ray's face remained unreadable. Rain beaded on his brow and ran down the bridge of his nose. His breathing stayed low and measured. He let Hale spend his own credibility in public, line by line. Behind Ray, the relay phone on his belt crackled with dispatch traffic. "Unit update. Door 4 patient Ortiz is stable with EMS and en route protocol initiated. Witness coordinator advises all private ramp witnesses remain in place for police statements." Hanley heard it, exhaled once, and gave Elena a quick nod. "Your granddad's stable," he said low and steady. "Stay right here with me." Relief crossed her face, but she did not look away from Ray. The dispatch transmission carried farther than usual in the rain-muted air, and several bystanders caught enough to steady themselves. An airport operations supervisor under the awning took 2 steps forward and called to the cluster near the carts. "You heard that? Hold position. Police need everyone who saw door 4 or this ramp." People who had been edging backward stopped and set their feet. A retired JAG colonel named Diane Mercer, waiting for a delayed flight under the awning, studied Ray with a lawyer's eye for detail and a soldier's memory for form. She caught the minute discipline in his stance, the deliberate hand position, the eyes scanning without darting. Her expression shifted from curiosity to recognition. She did not speak yet. She simply took out her phone, opened the voice memo app, and started a contemporaneous record. Hale noticed the phones rising now and grew sharper, more performative. "Record this," he said loudly, gesturing toward the crowd. "I'm being unlawfully detained by an unmarked male threatening my movement." Ray's voice, when it came, was calm enough to cut through rain. "No one has threatened you." Hale smirked, hearing only the lack of volume. "There it is. Thought so. You're nothing official." That was the fatal assumption, laid bare in front of everyone. That authority was costume unless backed by visible wealth. That discipline without display was weakness. That a broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket was just another obstacle to be bullied aside. Hale had mistaken silence for surrender. He had mistaken restraint for permission. The crowd felt the tension tighten into a single wire. Airline crews stopped moving carts. Fueling techs paused with hoses capped. A father drew his 2 children behind him, but kept them there to witness. The 2 Marines shifted half a step, not forward, just into readiness. Elena watched Ray without blinking. Ray's internal calculus ran clean and exact. Distance to Hale, 10 feet. Door position, open, potential re-entry in 1 second. Engine status, idling high, likely still in drive cycle. Security team confidence, recovering, responsive to command voice. Police ETA from dispatch pings, under 40 seconds. Civilian exposure arc if vehicle lunged forward. High at left flank, moderate at rear, low at right due to baggage cart barrier. He adjusted his stance a fraction, angling his body to narrow Hale's path to the open lane without signaling aggression. Every muscle was coiled, but no motion betrayed it. By the time the terminal clock clicked to 8:30, even the rain seemed to fall in slower beats. Hale took one more step and lowered his voice, trying a different weapon. You want to be a hero? Fine. Give me your phone, and I'll have my office make this worth your time. No one answered. The insult hung there, naked and heavy. From behind the witness line, the wheelchair attendant spoke, voice tight but steady. Mister, you can't buy your way out of this one. Hale turned his head toward the voice, annoyed. That half-second break in focus was all Ray needed to confirm what his instincts had been reporting since Door 4. Hale was not preparing violence. He was preparing escape and narrative control. Different threat, same obligation. Preserve life. Preserve truth. Hold the line. A police siren rose, closer now, bouncing off hangar walls. Blue lights flashed across rain and polished fuselage, then vanished behind the fuel truck as units maneuvered into position. Hale heard it and pivoted toward his SUV, intent finally visible. His hand reached for the doorframe. Ray did not lunge. He did not shout. He stepped once, precisely, into the lane between Hale and open tarmac, and stopped again, a human barrier set with ceremonial calm and combat certainty. The entire ramp froze on that image. Billionaire in a soaked designer suit, jaw clenched. Sentinel in a plain jacket, motionless as stone. Witnesses packed beneath awnings and light poles. Phones lowered now because what mattered had moved beyond spectacle. A child clutching dog tags in both hands. 2 Marines braced. Security teams waiting for command. Rain needling down through floodlight haze while sirens closed the distance. Ray held Hale's gaze and waited for the final second to arrive. When it did, it arrived in motion so small most people missed the beginning of it. Hale's right hand tightening on the doorframe, his left shoulder dipping toward the driver's seat, weight shifting to bolt back into the SUV and turn flight into a contest of horsepower against consequence. Ray moved on that shift. One step, not a charge, not a tackle. A single measured step that placed his body in the exact line between Hale and the open lane. Then his left hand rose, palm forward at chest height, command clear as a rifle crack across wet stone. Rain slid from his knuckles, his voice carried without strain. You struck a veteran and a child. Engine off, hands visible. The sentence landed like law. Hale stopped mid-turn, one polished shoe half planted in runoff, face pulled tight between disbelief and fury. For the first time that morning, his expression lost its rehearsed certainty. Ray did not blink. He did not repeat himself. In that still frame of rain and floodlight, the hidden variable became visible to everyone at once. The man in the plain jacket was not improvising anger. He was executing discipline. Ray spoke again, each detail clipped and exact. Virginia Plate K 8V4172. Door 4 crosswalk. Timestamp 8:23 and 41 seconds. Right mirror cracked on impact. Silver paint transfer on front bumper from wheelchair handle. Hale's mouth open, closed, opened again. You're guessing? No. The crowd inhaled as one body. Gasps moved through the ramp in uneven ripples, some in awe, others in outrage, finally finding voice. The pilot under the awning muttered, "He clocked all that in one pass?" The flight attendant beside him answered without looking away, "He clocked everything." Blue light flashed hard across the fuselage behind Hale. Then another. Airport Police Unit 14 came in from the South Access Road, tires cutting water, while Unit 22 rolled from the service gate, and Unit 9 sealed the rear lane by the fuel truck. Doors opened before engines stopped. Officers spread with practiced geometry, not sprinting, not shouting, each one taking an angle that left Hale space to comply and no space to run. "Driver, step away from the vehicle," a sergeant called. "Hands where we can see them." Hale snapped toward the nearest cruiser, relief and indignation colliding. "Finally. Arrest him. He blocked a secured ramp and threatened me." No officer moved toward Ray. Instead, Sergeant Melissa Grant, rain jacket darkened to near black, held her hand toward Hale. "Sir, keep your hands visible and step to my voice. Now." Hale stared at her as if he had misheard a language he believed he owned. "Do you know who I am?" Grant's tone did not change. "Yes, sir. We also know your plate, route, and impact damage. Step forward." For a heartbeat, Hale calculated one last gamble, eyes flicking to his open driver's door. Ray read it in the jaw muscle, in the narrowing gaze, in the micro-lean of hips preparing to pivot. He adjusted half a foot, nothing more, the same way he had shifted on patrol before an alley turn in Raqqa. The same way he had corrected lane position on the tomb mat when wind pushed at cloth and steel. Silent correction. Total control. Hale saw that adjustment and froze. Behind the police line, the witnesses who had held their ground began speaking all at once. "He hit them at door 4. I heard him yell. That mirror was already hanging." The baggage handler raised a trembling hand and called, "I saw the whole lane, Sergeant. He didn't break." The woman in the airline blazer lifted her tablet. "Incident log is time-stamped and preserved." Diane Mercer, the retired JAG colonel, stepped forward just enough to be heard and said, "I've recorded continuous observations since 8/29. Chain of events is clean. At 8:31 that morning, thunder rolled faint and distant, and the rain eased from needles to steady sheets. Hale tried one final strategy, voice rising sharp with practiced menace. "My legal office is on this. You touch me wrong, every one of you is finished. And you," he jabbed a finger at Ray, "you're a civilian playing soldier." Ray's expression never shifted. "Hands visible." That was all. The words stripped the scene down to fact and obligation. Hale's finger dropped, his shoulders sagged by a fraction that looked microscopic from a distance and catastrophic up close. He raised both hands. The crowd went silent again, but this silence was different from shock. This one carried judgment. Sergeant Grant moved in, secured Hale's wrists, and guided him to the hood of Unit 14 with professional restraint. No spectacle. No roughness. No deference. Another officer shut off the Escalade's engine and bagged the keys. A third began photographing the front bumper, the cracked mirror, the rain-beaded streak of silver transfer, calling out each frame for body cam record. Evidence, preserved in plain sight. Elena exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes. The Marine beside her kept his hand at her shoulder level, not touching, just there if needed. She looked past the cruisers to Ray and lifted the dog tags slightly, as if to show she still had them. Ray gave one almost imperceptible nod. 38 seconds after Hale was cuffed, a dark command SUV rolled through the gate and stopped beside Unit 22. Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Whitaker stepped out into the rain in service uniform under a field coat, campaign ribbons bright even in gray light, posture as rigid as old timber. He was tall, iron-haired, and carried command authority without theatrics. 2 military liaison officers followed, one with a sealed evidence pouch kit, the other on radio with airport command. Whitaker took in the scene in one sweep. Hale restrained, vehicle boxed, witnesses held, child protected, Ray standing centered in the lane like a fixed coordinate. Recognition crossed his face, then hardened into official focus. "Sergeant Grant," Whitaker said. "Status." Grant answered immediately. "Suspect Victor Hale detained without force. Probable felony hit and run, reckless endangerment, leaving scene of injury accident. Vehicle secured. Witnesses in place. Initial corroboration from multiple civilians and responding tracker." Whitaker turned to Ray. "Staff Sergeant Patel, report." Ray stood straight, rain dripping from his jawline. "Observed impact at door 4 crosswalk. Victim retired Gunnery Sergeant Samuel Ortiz. Injury to arm and hip from curb strike during evasive pullback. Child present, no direct physical injury observed. Suspect verbalized, move, parade people, fled scene. I relayed plate, damage markers, route projection, and timestamp to dispatch. Maintained visual track to this ramp." Whitaker held his eyes for a beat, then nodded once, sharp as a salute. "Your judgment was correct." Hale twisted against the cuffs just enough to face Whitaker. "Lieutenant Colonel, good, finally someone rational. This man interfered with executive movement and incited this circus. I expect him disciplined." Whitaker looked at him with the controlled calm of a man who had buried friends and outlived bluster. "Mr. Hale, you are under civilian jurisdiction at this location and currently in lawful custody based on corroborated witness testimony, physical evidence, and recorded dispatch continuity." His voice dropped 1 degree colder. "You will address him as Staff Sergeant Patel." Hale blinked, thrown off balance by formality he could not bend. "Staff Sergeant of what?" Whitaker did not flinch. "United States Army, the Old Guard, Tomb Sentinel." The words moved through the crowd like current. The pilot lowered his head. The ground mechanic straightened unconsciously. One wheelchair passenger pressed a hand over her mouth and whispered, "Tomb Guard." Even officers who had been all business glanced once at Ray with new understanding, not of power displayed, but of power restrained. Hale's face changed in stages: confusion, annoyance, then the first clean strike of public humiliation. He looked from Whitaker to Ray, recalibrating too late. "That's ceremonial." Whitaker's reply came like steel drawn from a scabbard. "Ceremony is discipline under oath. You mistook it for weakness." No one spoke after that. Grant resumed procedure. "Mr. Hale, you are being charged with felony hit and run involving injury and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." As she read, Officer Chen approached Whitaker with a tablet sealed in a clear weather sleeve. "Sir, CCTV sync from door 4 and East Corridor confirmed. Timestamp matches Staff Sergeant Patel's call. Audio capture includes suspect statement." He tapped the waveform. "Move, parade people. Clear as day." Whitaker gave a single nod. "Attach to primary case file and duplicate for Commonwealth attorney intake." The liaison officer beside him opened the evidence pouch kit on the hood of Unit 22 and logged the first physical items in careful sequence. Key fob, mirror fragments recovered near ramp edge, paint transfer swab from Escalade bumper, photo set IDs cross-referenced to body cam footage. Chain of custody signatures were taken in rain, ink pressed hard through wet paper. Nothing would drift. Nothing would vanish. Diane Mercer stepped forward when invited, identified herself for record, and offered her contemporaneous audio file. I practiced military law for 22 years. This is unedited and time-stamped. Grant accepted it, logged device transfer, and issued receipt. The baggage handler gave his statement next, then the airline supervisor, then the pilot. External contacts resolved into documented testimony, each voice adding weight that money could not subtract. Ray remained where he was unless addressed, hands relaxed at his sides, breath steady, eyes scanning the witness line and vehicle perimeter. To most of the ramp, he looked calm. Inside, the same old vigilance tracked every loose edge until command sealed it. Elena's position secure, no secondary threat vehicle approaching, fuel zone clear, Ortiz status pending hospital update. That update came at 8:39, crackling through Grant's shoulder radio. EMS to ramp command. Patient Samuel Ortiz arrived MedStar transfer point. Stable vitals, probable contusions, and forearm laceration. Imaging pending. Child remains uninjured. Ray's jaw loosened by a fraction. Whitaker heard it, turned slightly, and said quietly, meant only for him. You held the line, Patel. Ray answered in the same low register. He deserved better than that curb, sir. Whitaker's gaze shifted briefly to Elena beneath the awning. They both did. Hale was guided toward Unit 14. Cameras from 2 local crews, held at perimeter by airport policy, caught the image they had chased all morning. A billionaire in cuffs under gray rain, escorted past his own idling jet route, while officers carried evidence bags behind him. He tried to turn his face away. There was nowhere to turn that did not contain witnesses. As the cruiser door opened, Hale looked back once at Ray, searching for anger he could dismiss or triumph he could challenge. He found neither. He found a sentinel's stillness, unreadable and immovable. The door shut. Engine noise dropped. Rain softened. Procedure replaced drama. Officers continued logs. Witnesses were thanked and released in phases after statements were verified. The Escalade was towed under police hold for forensic processing. Dispatch confirmed all calls cross-referenced and archived. The loaded details had paid off one by one: plate, mirror, timestamp, route, words spoken, injury mechanism, camera angles, witness identities. Nothing remained loose. Whitaker stepped beside Ray as the last of the immediate paperwork was sealed. Airport Command wants a formal commendation packet. Ray kept his eyes forward. Request it. Include Sergeant Grant, Luna, and the Marines who shielded the child. Whitaker's mouth tightened at one corner, not a smile, but close. Already in motion. He paused, then added with full command voice so nearby officers could hear, for the record, Staff Sergeant Patel acted within law, within duty, and with exemplary restraint. His intervention prevented further risk and preserved critical evidence. Grant answered first. Agreed, sir. Then, from the witness line, the words spread in quieter forms. He saved that scene. He kept everyone steady. He never raised his voice. The crowd that had frozen now stood transformed, not by spectacle, but by the sight of earned honor refusing to bend. Whitaker gave Ray a final nod. Report to liaison desk when cleared. Then get back where you're needed. Ray answered, yes, sir. And the rain kept falling over the ramp, where purchase status had met discipline memory and lost. Ray and Whitaker left the ramp together under a shared umbrella one of the liaison officers pushed into Whitaker's hand, though neither man seemed to notice the rain anymore. The adrenaline had burned off into procedure, and procedure now had to be finished without a single loose thread. They entered the airport operations corridor through a steel door that thudded shut behind them, trading jet noise for fluorescent hum, damp concrete smell, and the clipped voices of dispatch replaying incidents on loop. At 8:47, Ray sat at a narrow liaison desk beneath a wall monitor split into 6 camera feeds. He gave his formal statement once, in chronological order, without embellishment and without omission. A captain from airport police typed while a military legal clerk cross-checked every timestamp against CAD logs. Plate observed? The captain asked. K8V-4172. Initial impact marker? Right mirror fracture hanging on housing, silver paint transfer at front bumper, contact at wheelchair handle, not direct body strike. Verbal statement by suspect? Move, parade people. The captain nodded, then read each line back. Ray corrected one preposition, then signed. Across the desk, evidence moved from field custody to case custody in a visible chain. The key fob was sealed in bag AP11. Mirror fragments from the ramp edge were dried, photographed, and logged under AP12. The paint transfer swab entered AP13 with a notation tying it to both the Escalade bumper and scrape marks on Ortiz's wheelchair handle. Officer Chen arrived with still images printed from door 4 and the East Corridor. Each was marked with camera ID and synchronized clock offset. Diane Mercer's phone recording, received by Sergeant Grant, had been duplicated to secure storage, checksum verified, and the device returned to her with signed receipt in hand. The teenage witness in the varsity jacket, who had lowered his phone earlier in shame, came in with his father and surrendered a 9-second clip he had captured after impact. The clip did not show the strike itself, but it captured Hale's vehicle, accelerating through the crossing and the dangling mirror, and that was enough to reinforce sequence. The camera gap near door 4 that Ray had flagged in his first mental map also got resolved. A delivery van had briefly blocked one fixed angle, exactly as he predicted, but a shuttle bus dash camera in the adjacent lane had the crosswalk in partial view, and audio from the curbside pole microphone carried Hale's words clearly. What looked like a blind spot at first had become corroboration from overlapping systems. Nothing vanished in noise. At 9:16, Luna arrived in a dry airport polo, hair still wet, and gave his statement with both hands flat on the table. When he finished, he looked at Ray and said, "I figured military. Didn't know old guard." Ray answered, "You drove clean under pressure." That mattered. Luna shook his head once, trying to absorb the morning. "That kid stayed braver than half the adults." "She did," Ray said. By 10:03, hospital liaison called in on speaker. Samuel Ortiz had a forearm fracture, deep bruising at the hip, and no internal bleed. Elena was uninjured. The nurse from door 4, still in scrubs, had stayed long enough to make sure intake included mechanism notes exactly as relayed. Those notes matched the dispatch call and body cam timeline. External contact resolved. No contradictions. Whitaker stood at the back of the room with arms folded while the Commonwealth intake attorney joined by secure video. Charges were read into the file. Felony hit and run involving injury, reckless endangerment, and related traffic offenses. Hale's counsel attempted immediate release from custody based on business travel obligations. The intake attorney asked one question: "Is there verified flight risk?" Sergeant Grant answered by sliding a photo of the charter jet stairs and active boarding crew, time-stamped to the minute Hale was detained. The request for immediate release died there. At 11:28, Ray was released from formal interview. He walked to MedStar with Whitaker and one liaison officer, boots quiet on polished hospital tile, jacket finely dry at the shoulders. Ortiz sat upright in a treatment room with his arm in a rigid splint and a blanket over his knees. Elena occupied the visitor chair like a sentry half his size, dog tags looped around both hands. Ortiz saw Ray in the doorway and straightened as far as pain allowed. "Staff Sergeant," Ray stepped in. "Gunny?" No one spoke for a second. Then Ortiz lifted his good hand in a clean salute from the chair. Ray returned it, exact and unhurried. "You kept your word," Elena said. "I said I'd come back," Ray answered. She held up the tags. "I didn't let go." "I know." Whitaker spoke with Ortiz's attending physician in the hall, got the discharge conditions, and returned with a folded paper. "Victim support transport is arranged. Also, both of you are invited to Arlington Gallery seating at dawn tomorrow if you want it." Elena looked to her grandfather first. Ortiz nodded once. "We'll be there." That afternoon, in an airport-adjacent magistrate courtroom that smelled of old wood and raincoats, Hale appeared in a wrinkled suit and said little. The gallery was small, Grant in uniform, Mercer with her legal pad, Luna in work boots, the varsity teenager with his father, and two airline staff who had chosen to stay for the hearing instead of going home. Ray did not attend. Whitaker had ordered rest before morning post, and Ray obeyed. But his statement, dispatch audio, CCTV sync, witness accounts, and evidence logs were read into record in his absence, each piece fitting the next without strain. Bail conditions were set at a level Hale's counsel called excessive. The judge called them appropriate, citing demonstrated attempt to depart jurisdiction. The gavel fell once. Status had met structure and found structure stronger. Before sunset, Whitaker sent a final message to Ray. Commendation packet filed. Includes Sergeant Grant, G. Luna, Corporal Hanley, an accompanying Marine, door 4 nurse, witness coordinator. Ray read it in silence, then replied with 2 words, "Thank you." At first light the next morning, Arlington carried a colder wind than the day before. Mist moved low over the slopes, and the headstones rose through it in endless white alignment, each one catching dawn along its top edge. Visitors entered in subdued lines, shoes whispering on stone. A school group gathered near the rear with their teacher speaking softly. An elderly couple in veteran pins stood shoulder to shoulder without talking. The man in the Silver Star cap had returned and taken his place near the rope line. The nurse from door 4 stood 3 rows back in a clean coat. Hospital badge tucked away this time. Ray stepped onto the mat in full dress, and the world narrowed to duty. His uniform was immaculate. Every crease was sharp enough to cut glass. Brass gleamed clean. White gloves were pristine. Kepi set perfect, rifle steady. His face held the unreadable calm that had steadied a runway and now steadied memory itself. His boots clicked in perfect rhythm. 21 steps, pause, turn, repeat. In the gallery seating, Ortiz sat with his arm in a sling, Elena beside him in the same denim jacket, dog tags now resting against her sweater instead of clenched in her fist. Corporal Hanley, off shift and in civilian clothes, stood 2 rows behind them with the other Marine. They did not wave, they watched. Ray completed 1 pass, pivoted on axis, and began his return. To the crowd, he was ceremonial precision. Inside, he felt the full weight of the previous day settle into the cadence rather than against it. The unknowns beneath the marble. Mac's voice from a chow line years ago. Ortiz on a hospital chair returning a salute through pain. A child asking if he would come back and believing him when he said yes. Duty was not abstraction. It was repetition with consequence. A park guide near the steps gave a quiet explanation to new arrivals. The Sentinel's pace is exact. The ritual does not bend to weather. She paused as Ray turned again. That is the point. Halfway through the next cycle, Elena placed her hand over her heart. No one prompted her. Ortiz saw it and mirrored her, fingers rough and steady at his chest. The movement passed outward in small echoes. The Silver Star veteran did the same, then the nurse, then the varsity teenager, then his father. No command was issued. Reverence spread by witness. Ray reached center line, eyes fixed ahead, and for a single breath his gaze softened toward the gallery without breaking bearing. Elena caught it, not as a smile, not as acknowledgement for display, but as a promise kept in the only language his role allowed. Whitaker stood at the perimeter with Mercer and Sergeant Grant. Mercer watched the cadence and said quietly, "Courtrooms punish. Places like this teach." Whitaker answered, "Both matter." Grant kept her eyes on the mat. "Yesterday he preserved a case. Today he preserves memory." No one tried to improve on that. The wind shifted, lifting the flag just enough to make it speak, once against the pole, then settle. Sunlight strengthened over the marble inscription. Rows of headstones held their silent formation across the hill. The plaza remained still except for one moving line of discipline under oath. Ray marched. 21 steps. Pause. Turn. Repeat. He marched for the unnamed, for the named, for the living who almost became a statistic at an airport curb, for the child who held dog tags and her ground, for the old Marine who saluted through pain, for the men like Mac who never came home, and for a country that too often forgot until someone stood perfectly still and made remembering unavoidable. His boots struck stone with measured certainty while dawn opened over Arlington, and the sacred order of things was restored in cadence, in silence, and in honor that could never be purchased.